The blood on Emma Norton's dress had turned from crimson to rust brown in the scorching Arizona sun, and her breathing came in shallow, broken gasps as she lay twisted in the dust between two barrel cacti just outside Vulture City, where the stagecoach that carried her had overturned an hour before and left her dragging behind it for nearly half a mile. Jacob Foster pulled his bay gelding to a stop the moment he spotted what looked like a pile of discarded clothing near the rocky outcrop. But his stomach turned when he realized those were human limbs bent at unnatural angles. He dismounted before his horse fully stopped, his boots hitting the ground hard as he ran to the woman lying face down in the dirt. Her dress was torn nearly to ribbons, exposing deep lacerations across her back and shoulders where the rough ground had scraped away skin and fabric alike. Her dark auburn hair, matted with blood and dust, partially obscured her face. "Madam," Jacob said, dropping to his knees beside her. He touched her shoulder with careful fingers, terrified she might already be gone. "Madam, can you hear me?" A sound emerged from her lips, something between a moan and a whimper, and relief flooded through him so powerfully his hands shook. She was alive. Badly hurt, bleeding, broken perhaps in ways he could not see, but alive. He looked around the desolate landscape, searching for any sign of what had happened. Wheel tracks carved deep ruts in the earth, veering sharply to the left where the road curved. He could see where the stagecoach had tipped, the splintered wood scattered across the rocks, and then the terrible drag marks where something or someone had been pulled behind it. "I have got you now," Jacob said softly, though he was not certain she could hear him. "I am going to lift you up, and it is going to hurt something fierce, but I need to get you to Doc Harrison in town. Do you understand?" Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes the color of spring moss, glazed with pain and confusion. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Jacob slipped one arm beneath her knees and another under her shoulders, bracing himself. When he lifted her, she cried out, a sound of such raw agony that it nearly made him set her back down. But leaving her here meant certain death under the brutal sun, with the vultures already circling overhead. "I am sorry," he whispered against her hair as he carried her to his horse. "I am so sorry." Getting her onto the saddle while mounted himself required more maneuvering than he had time for, but he managed to settle into the saddle first, then positioned her across his lap, cradling her against his chest. She had lost consciousness again, which was perhaps a mercy given how much the ride would jostle her injuries. He could feel her blood seeping through his shirt, warm and wet against his skin. Jacob urged his horse into the fastest gait he dared, a steady lope that ate up the miles between this forsaken stretch of desert and Vulture City. The town had sprung up around the Vulture mine back in 1863, just 12 years ago, and while it had grown into a proper settlement with a hotel, saloons, a general store, and even a small church, it remained rough around the edges. Jacob had been working the surrounding ranches for the past 3 years, saving money to buy land of his own. At 26, he figured he had earned the right to build something permanent, something that would last beyond his own lifetime. The woman in his arms stirred again, her head rolling against his shoulder. Up close, even through the blood and dirt, he could see she was young, probably not yet 25, with delicate features that spoke of gentler origins than this harsh territory. Her hands, though scratched and bleeding, showed no calluses from hard labor. She wore a wedding band on her left hand, a simple gold piece that caught the afternoon light. "Where is your husband?" Jacob asked, though he knew she could not answer. "Where is everyone else from that coach?" The thought that others might be injured or dead somewhere along that road troubled him, but this woman would die for certain if he delayed getting her to the doctor. He would send someone back to search once he reached town. Vulture City appeared on the horizon like a mirage, its weathered buildings shimmering in the heat. Jacob rode straight down the main thoroughfare, ignoring the startled looks from townspeople as they saw the bloodied woman in his arms. He pulled up in front of Doc Harrison's office, a small structure attached to the side of the boarding house. "Doc," Jacob shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. "Doc Harrison, I need you." The door burst open and Elijah Harrison stepped out, wiping his hands on a towel. He was a man of 50-odd years, with silver threading through his dark hair and the steady hands of someone who had sewn up more wounds than he cared to count. His eyes widened when he saw Emma. "Bring her inside, quickly," Doc Harrison said, holding the door wide. "Put her on the table there." Jacob carried her into the exam room, a cramped space that smelled of carbolic acid and something else, something metallic and sharp. He laid her as gently as he could on the wooden table that served as Doc Harrison's operating surface. In the brighter light of the room, her injuries looked even worse. Her left arm was clearly broken, bent wrong just below the elbow. Her face was swollen on one side, already purpling with bruises. The lacerations on her back still bled sluggishly. "What happened?" Doc Harrison asked, already cutting away the remains of her dress with quick, efficient movements. "Found her out on the East Road, maybe 5 miles from here," Jacob said. "Looks like a stagecoach accident. She was dragged." Doc Harrison made a sound low in his throat, something between sympathy and professional assessment. "She is lucky you found her when you did. Another hour in that sun, and we would be having a very different conversation. I need you to go fetch Mrs. Chen from the boarding house. I will need her help, and this young lady will need a woman's presence when she wakes." Jacob hesitated, reluctant to leave her. The woman's eyes had opened again, those green eyes finding his face and holding there as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. "Go on," Doc Harrison said more firmly. "She is in good hands now." Jacob forced himself to step back, to turn away, to walk out into the brutal afternoon sun. His shirt was still damp with her blood, and his arms felt empty without her weight. He crossed the street to the boarding house, where Lily Chen ran a respectable establishment that housed miners, ranchers, and the occasional traveling merchant. Mrs. Chen, a woman of Chinese descent who had come to California during the gold rush and eventually made her way to Arizona with her late husband, was known for her discretion and her steady temperament. She answered his knock immediately, took one look at his blood-stained clothes, and grabbed her shawl without asking questions. Together, they hurried back to the doctor's office. Inside, Doc Harrison had already cleaned much of the blood away and was examining the broken arm. 3 ribs cracked, possibly 4, he said without looking up. "That arm needs to be set. These lacerations will need stitching, dozens of them. She has a concussion, that much is certain. Internal injuries are possible, but I will not know the extent until she is more stable." Mrs. Chen moved to the other side of the table, her small hands already reaching for clean bandages. "You should go clean yourself up," she said to Jacob, her English carrying the musical lilt of her first language. "We will take care of her now." But Jacob found himself rooted to the spot, watching as Doc Harrison began the painful work of setting the broken arm. The woman, mercifully, remained unconscious through the process. He watched the doctor's careful hands, the way Mrs. Chen anticipated every need, passing instruments and bandages without being asked. He watched the rise and fall of the woman's chest, counting each breath as if his attention alone could keep her tethered to life. "Son," Doc Harrison said, finally looking up at him. "You did good bringing her in, but you are not helping anyone by standing there. Go get yourself cleaned up, get something to eat, and then go find Sheriff Dawson." He will want to know about that stagecoach, and there might be others who need help." The practical words cut through Jacob's strange paralysis. He nodded and backed toward the door, taking one last look at the woman on the table. In the lamplight, with her face cleaned of dirt and blood, she looked younger somehow, more vulnerable. A fierce protectiveness rose in his chest, unfamiliar and overwhelming. Sheriff Thomas Dawson was a barrel-chested man with a thick mustache and eyes that missed nothing. Jacob found him outside the assayer's office, talking to a group of miners about a recent claim dispute. When Jacob approached, still wearing his blood-stained shirt, the sheriff immediately dismissed the miners and turned his full attention to him. "Jacob Foster, you look like you have been through hell and back," Dawson said. "What happened?" Jacob explained about finding the woman, the overturned stagecoach, the drag marks in the dirt. The sheriff's expression grew grimmer with each detail. "That would be the Wednesday coach from Phoenix," Dawson said. "Should have arrived this morning. When it did not show, I figured they had wheel trouble or decided to wait out the heat. You say you only found the woman." "Only her," Jacob confirmed. "But I did not search the area thoroughly. I just got her to the doctor as fast as I could." "You did right," Dawson assured him. "I will get a group together and ride out there before dark. That coach usually carries 4 or 5 passengers plus the driver and guard. If they are hurt out there, we need to find them. If they are not hurt, I need to know why they left a woman behind." The implications of that statement hung heavy in the air between them. Jacob felt his jaw tighten. "You think someone left her deliberately?" "I think accidents happen, but I also think people sometimes make choices that ought to get them strung up," Dawson said flatly. "Either way, we will find out. You up for riding back out there with us?" Jacob glanced back toward the doctor's office. Every instinct screamed at him to stay, to be there when the woman woke up, to make sure she was truly going to survive. But if there were others who needed help, he could not stand by. "Give me 10 minutes to change my shirt and get a fresh horse," he said. 20 minutes later, Jacob rode out with Sheriff Dawson and 4 other men, retracing the path he had taken earlier. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and orange. When they reached the site of the accident, they found it exactly as Jacob had described, but with one crucial addition. 2 bodies lay near the overturned stagecoach, partially hidden by a stand of creosote bushes. The men dismounted and approached carefully. The first body was the driver, a man named Pete Sutherland who had been running the Phoenix route for 2 years. He had been shot once in the chest. The second body was the guard, similarly killed. Both men had been dead for hours. "This was not any accident," Sheriff Dawson said, his voice hard as iron. "This was a robbery, plain and simple. They shot the driver and guard, probably took the strongbox, and when the coach tipped in the chaos, they just rode off." One of the other men, a rancher named Bill Hutchins, was searching the ground near the coach. "There are boot prints here, looks like 3, maybe 4 men. Shod horses heading northeast." "The Rojas gang," another man suggested. "They have been working this territory for months." Dawson nodded slowly. "Could be. But right now, I am more concerned about the other passengers. Stage manifest would have been in the driver's coat. They found the manifest, water-damaged but legible. According to the paperwork, the coach had been carrying 5 passengers. Emma Norton, age 23, traveling from St. Louis to Vulture City. Reverend Michael Aldridge and his wife Constance, heading to Prescott, and 2 mining engineers named Howard Webb and Charles Finch, bound for the silver claims north of town. 5 passengers, and we have only found one," Dawson said. "Start searching in wider circles." They could not have gotten far in this heat if they were hurt. The search took another hour, and what they found painted a grim picture. Reverend Aldridge was discovered a quarter-mile east, dead from a gunshot wound to the head. His wife was found nearby, also shot, but she had crawled nearly 50 yards before succumbing to her injuries. The two engineers were found together, having apparently made a stand before being killed. "They executed them," Jacob said, staring down at the bodies with horror and rage churning in his gut. "They robbed the coach and then executed everyone." "Except they missed one," Dawson said grimly. "That woman you found, Emma Norton, she is the only survivor. Which means when she wakes up, she might be able to tell us who did this." The men wrapped the bodies in canvas and loaded them onto spare horses. The ride back to Vulture City was somber, each man lost in his own thoughts about the brutality they had witnessed. Jacob could not stop thinking about Emma, alone in the dust, dragged and broken, left for dead by men who had murdered her fellow passengers in cold blood. The fact that she had survived seemed nothing short of miraculous. It was full dark by the time they returned to town. The bodies were taken to the undertakers, and Sheriff Dawson began the grim work of documenting the crime and sending telegrams to the territorial marshal's office. Jacob, exhausted and soul-sick, returned to Doc Harrison's office. Mrs. Chen answered his knock, her face drawn with fatigue. "She is resting," she said quietly. "The doctor gave her laudanum for the pain. She woke once very briefly but was not coherent." "Did she say anything?" Jacob asked. "She asked for someone named Thomas," Mrs. Chen said. "Called for him several times before the medicine took her under again." Thomas. The name settled in Jacob's chest like a stone. Her husband, most likely. He glanced at the wedding band still on her finger and felt foolish for the disappointment that accompanied the observation. What had he expected? That a woman like her would be unattached? That his few hours of carrying her to safety had created some kind of bond? "You should go home, get some rest," Mrs. Chen said gently. "There is nothing more you can do tonight." But Jacob shook his head. "I would like to sit with her if that is all right, just for a while, Mrs." Chen studied his face, her dark eyes knowing, and then nodded. "Come. You can sit by her bedside. I will bring you some coffee." She led him to a small room off the main office, where Emma lay in a narrow bed, covered with clean white sheets. Her face was still swollen and bruised, but someone had washed her hair and braided it loosely over one shoulder. Her breathing was steady now, deep, and even with the laudanum. Her broken arm was splinted and bound against her chest. Jacob pulled a chair close to the bedside and sat down heavily, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. Mrs. Chen brought him coffee as promised, and a plate of rice and vegetables that he forced himself to eat though he had little appetite. The hours crept by, marked by the ticking of the clock on the wall and the soft sounds of Emma's breathing. Somewhere near midnight, her eyes opened. For a long moment, she stared at the ceiling, confusion evident in her expression. Then her gaze found Jacob, sitting in the chair beside her bed, and recognition flickered across her face. "You," she whispered, her voice rough and raw. "You found me." "Yes, madam," Jacob said, leaning forward. "My name is Jacob Foster. You are in Vulture City in the doctor's office. You are safe now." Her eyes filled with tears that spilled down her temples into her hair. "The others," she said. "The Reverend and his wife, the two engineers, are they?" Jacob hesitated, but lies would serve no purpose. "I am sorry, they did not make it." A sob broke from her chest, and she tried to curl in on herself, only to cry out in pain as her injuries protested the movement. Jacob half rose from his chair, helpless in the face of her anguish. "Easy," he said. "You have got broken ribs and a broken arm. You need to stay still." "They shot them," Emma gasped between sobs. 4 men stopped the coach. They shot the driver and the guard first, just killed them without warning. Then they told us all to get out. The Reverend tried to reason with them, and they shot him too. His wife screamed, and they shot her. The engineers tried to run, and they shot them. I tried to run too, but I caught my foot in the coach door, and when they drove the horses away in a panic, I was dragged. I thought I was going to die. I wanted to die. You did not die, Jacob said firmly. You survived. And you are going to keep surviving. She turned her face toward him, her green eyes swimming with tears and pain and something else, something like desperation. Thomas, she said. I need to send word to Thomas. He is waiting for me in Prescott. He will be so worried. We will send word first thing in the morning, Jacob assured her, though the name felt like ash in his mouth. Right now, you need to rest and heal. I was supposed to meet him in Prescott in 3 days, Emma continued, her words starting to slur as the laudanum pulled her back under. We were going to be married at the mission there. He is with the cavalry stationed at Fort Whipple. Captain Thomas Norton. You will tell him I am all right. Jacob froze. Your name is Emma Norton, he said slowly. You are already wearing a wedding band. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. My mother's ring, she said. Thomas sent me the money for passage from St. Louis, but he said it was not safe for a woman to travel alone through this territory without the protection of a married name. So I wore my mother's ring and traveled as Mrs. Norton, though the marriage is not real yet. Not until we reach the mission. Her eyes drifted closed. You will tell him. I will tell him, Jacob promised, though the words felt like a betrayal of something he could not name. She was asleep again within moments, her breathing deep and steady. Jacob sat back in his chair, trying to unknot the tangle of emotions in his chest. She was engaged to be married, to a cavalry officer no less. Of course she was. A woman like Emma Norton, educated and refined, would never look twice at a cowboy who still slept in a boarding house and worked other men's land. But none of that changed the fact that, when he had lifted her from the dust, when he had felt her blood seeping through his shirt, when he had counted every breath during that desperate ride to town, something had shifted inside him. Something fundamental and irreversible. Doc Harrison appeared in the doorway, looking tired but satisfied. She was coherent, he asked. Coherent enough to tell me what happened, Jacob said. It was a robbery. 4 men murdered everyone on that coach. She only survived because she was dragged away before they could finish her. Then she is a very lucky young woman, the doctor said. Though I doubt she feels lucky right now. Those injuries are going to take weeks to heal properly, maybe months. She will need constant care. She has a fiancé, Jacob said, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. Captain Thomas Norton, stationed at Fort Whipple. She wants him notified. I will make sure Sheriff Dawson sends a telegram in the morning, Doc Harrison said. In the meantime, you should get some real sleep, Jacob. You have done everything you can for her. But Jacob could not bring himself to leave. He spent the rest of the night in that chair, dozing fitfully, waking every time Emma stirred or made a sound. By the time dawn light began filtering through the window, he had made a decision. Until this Captain Norton arrived to claim her, Jacob would make sure Emma Norton wanted for nothing. He would see to her safety, her comfort, her recovery. It was the least he could do for the woman he had pulled from death's doorstep. It was the least he could do for the woman he was already half in love with, whether he had any right to those feelings or not. The morning brought Mrs. Chen with breakfast and fresh bandages. She shooed Jacob out of the room while she helped Emma with personal necessities, and he stumbled into the bright Arizona sunshine feeling hollowed out and strange. The town was already awake and bustling, miners heading to their claims, shopkeepers opening their doors, the smell of fresh bread drifting from the bakery. Sheriff Dawson found him outside the saloon. Heard the Norton woman was awake and talking. Did she give you a description of the men who did this? Jacob realized he had been so focused on her injuries and her engagement that he had not pressed her for details about the killers. 4 men, he said. That is all she said before the laudanum took her under again. I can ask her more when she is stronger. Do that, Dawson said. Every detail helps. In the meantime, I sent telegrams to Prescott and Phoenix, letting them know what happened. The territorial marshal will probably send someone down to investigate. He paused, studying Jacob's face. You look like hell, son. When was the last time you slept in an actual bed? I am fine, Jacob said automatically. You are not fine, but I appreciate the dedication, Dawson said. That woman is lucky you were the one who found her. Most men would not have bothered. Jacob thought about the 4 men who had murdered everyone on that stagecoach and ridden away, leaving Emma to die in the dust. Most men would not have done what those killers did either, he said. But they did it anyway. Over the following days, Jacob fell into a routine. He would arrive at Doc Harrison's office before dawn, sitting with Emma while she slept. When she woke, he would help her sip water or broth, would read to her from the handful of books the doctor kept in his office, would simply sit in companionable silence when the pain was too much for conversation. Mrs. Chen came and went, tending to Emma's more intimate needs and changing her bandages. Doc Harrison checked on her progress twice a day, pleased that infection had not set in despite the severity of her wounds. Emma, for her part, seemed to find comfort in Jacob's presence. She talked about her life in St. Louis, where she had worked as a teacher at a girls' school. She talked about meeting Thomas Norton at a church social when he was on leave, how he had courted her with letters over the course of 2 years before finally proposing. She talked about her excitement and her fear at leaving everything familiar to start a new life in the frontier territories. I thought I was brave, she said one afternoon, her voice still weak but gaining strength each day. Traveling all this way alone, ready to build a life in a place I had never seen. But when those men stopped the coach, when I saw what they were capable of, I realized I did not know anything about real fear, about real danger. Bravery is not about never being afraid, Jacob said, setting aside the book he had been reading. It is about being afraid and doing what needs doing anyway. You survived something that would have killed most people. That takes a kind of strength that has nothing to do with fear. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Jacob felt the weight of that gaze all the way to his bones. You saved my life, she said quietly. I have not properly thanked you for that. No thanks necessary, Jacob said. Any decent person would have done the same. I do not think that is true, Emma said. I think there are a lot of people who would have ridden past, or who would have been too afraid to get involved. But you did not hesitate. Mrs. Chen told me how you carried me all the way to town, how you refused to leave even when the doctor told you to rest. Why? Jacob did not have a good answer for that, or rather, he had an answer he could not speak aloud. Because when I saw you lying there, something in me recognized something in you. Because lifting you into my arms felt like the most important thing I have ever done. Because I am falling in love with you, and it is the worst possible timing and the worst possible situation, and I have no right to these feelings, but they exist anyway. Because it was the right thing to do, he said instead, which was true enough, even if it was not the whole truth. A telegram arrived from Fort Whipple on Emma's 5th day of recovery. Captain Thomas Norton would arrive in Vulture City within the week to collect his fiancée and transport her to Prescott for proper medical care, and eventually, their wedding. The news should have brought Emma joy, but Jacob watched her face as Mrs. Chen read the telegram aloud and saw only a flicker of anxiety cross her features. That is wonderful news, Emma said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I will finally get to see him again." "You do not sound entirely pleased," Mrs. Chen observed gently. Emma was quiet for a long moment. "I have not seen Thomas in over a year," she finally said. "We have maintained our engagement through letters, but that is not the same as truly knowing someone. What if I get to Prescott and discover we have nothing in common anymore? What if he is disappointed in me, in who I have become?" "Then he is a fool," Jacob said, the words coming out more forcefully than he had intended. Both women looked at him in surprise. "Sorry, I just mean, you have been through something terrible and you have survived it with grace and courage. Any man worth his salt would be proud to have you at his side." Emma's eyes softened. "Thank you, Jacob. That means more than you know." The week passed too quickly. Emma grew stronger each day, able to sit up in bed, to take short walks around the room with Mrs. Chen's assistance. The worst of her bruises began to fade from purple to yellow-green. Her ribs still ached with every breath, and her broken arm would need weeks more to heal properly, but she was undeniably on the mend. Jacob found himself memorizing details about her, hoarding them like a miser hoards gold. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was thinking. The soft laugh that escaped her when something genuinely amused her, so different from the polite laughter he imagined she used in social situations. The way she looked in the morning light, with the sun turning her auburn hair to burnished copper. On the 8th day after the attack, Captain Thomas Norton arrived in Vulture City. Jacob was sitting with Emma when they heard the commotion outside, the sound of horses and men's voices. Sheriff Dawson appeared in the doorway moments later, accompanied by a tall man in cavalry blues. Thomas Norton was handsome in a clean-cut, military way, with dark hair trimmed short and a neat mustache. He was probably 30, maybe 32, with the bearing of a man accustomed to command. "Emma," he said, striding into the room and going immediately to her bedside. He took her good hand in both of his expression a mix of relief and concern. "My God, when I received word about the attack, I feared the worst. Thank the Lord you are alive." "Thomas," Emma said, and Jacob heard the uncertainty in her voice even if the captain did not. "I am so glad you are here." Thomas Norton's gaze swept over her injuries, his jaw tightening. "The telegram said you were badly hurt, but I had no idea it was this severe." "Your arm, your face, Emma, what happened?" "I was dragged behind the stagecoach when the horses bolted," Emma said quietly. "The men who robbed us, they killed everyone else. I only survived because Jacob found me and brought me to the doctor." For the first time, Thomas Norton seemed to notice Jacob's presence. He turned, releasing Emma's hand, and extended his own to Jacob. "You must be Jacob Foster. Sheriff Dawson told me what you did. I am in your debt, sir. You saved my fiancée's life." Jacob shook the offered hand, trying not to notice how easily Thomas had claimed ownership of Emma with that single word. "Fiancé." "I did what anyone would have done," he said. "Nevertheless, I am grateful," Thomas said. He turned back to Emma. "I have arranged for a wagon to transport you to Fort Whipple. The medical facilities there are superior to what is available in this town, no offense to the local doctor. You will have the best care the Army can provide." "When do we leave?" Emma asked. "Tomorrow morning, if you are strong enough," Thomas said. "The journey will not be comfortable, but the sooner we get you to proper facilities, the better." Doc Harrison had entered the room during this exchange. "Miss Norton is healing well," he said, "but she is still very fragile. That arm needs another 4 weeks minimum before the splint can be removed. Her ribs will pain her for some time yet, and the trauma of what she experienced, that will take even longer to heal." "I understand," Thomas said crisply. "Which is why I want her under the care of the fort surgeon as soon as possible. We can be married once she is fully recovered. There is no rush." Jacob watched Emma's face and saw something flicker there, some emotion he could not quite name. Relief, disappointment, he could not tell. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparations. Thomas Norton took a room at the boarding house and spent the afternoon arranging for supplies, and a proper wagon with a mattress in the back for Emma to lie on during the journey. Sheriff Dawson met with him to discuss the investigation into the murders, and Thomas promised that the Army would assist in tracking down the killers. Jacob found himself with little to do and nowhere to be. He should have been happy that Emma would receive better care, that she would be safe at the fort, that her life could return to something resembling normalcy. But instead, he felt hollow, as if someone had scooped out his insides and left only the shell of who he had been before he found her in the dust. He was standing outside the saloon at sunset when Emma appeared, leaning heavily on Mrs. Chen's arm. She had dressed in a simple calico dress that Mrs. Chen had altered to accommodate her splinted arm, and despite her injuries, she looked beautiful. "Jacob," she said, slightly breathless from the effort of walking. "I was hoping to find you. I wanted to say goodbye properly, not just in front of Thomas and the doctor and everyone else." Mrs. Chen, with characteristic discretion, stepped away to examine the wares in the shop window across the street, giving them the illusion of privacy. "You do not need to say goodbye," Jacob said, though the words felt like broken glass in his throat. "You should be focused on getting well, on starting your new life." "I know," Emma said, "but I could not leave without telling you how much these past days have meant to me. You have been so kind, so patient. You sat with me when I was terrified and in pain. You read to me and talked to me and made me feel less alone. I will never forget that." "You are easy to be kind to," Jacob said, which was both true and wholly inadequate to express what he felt. Emma stepped closer, and he caught the faint scent of lavender soap. "I have something I need to say, and I am probably going to regret it, but if I do not say it now, I will wonder for the rest of my life what might have happened if I had been braver." Jacob's heart began to pound. "Emma, these past 8 days, talking with you, getting to know you, I have felt something I did not expect to feel," she said in a rush. "Something that makes me question everything I thought I wanted. When I agreed to marry Thomas, it was because he represented stability and security and a chance at a new life. But now, after everything that has happened, I find myself wondering if those are the right reasons to marry someone." "You are confused," Jacob said, even as hope and dread warred in his chest. "You have been through a terrible trauma. Your feelings are not reliable right now." "Maybe," Emma admitted. "Or maybe nearly dying has made me see things more clearly than I ever have before. When I woke up and saw you sitting by my bed, when I realized you had been there all night watching over me, I felt safe in a way I have never felt before. Not just physically safe, but truly seen and understood and valued. And I do not know what to do with that feeling because I am engaged to another man, and I gave my word, and I am not the kind of person who breaks promises." Jacob wanted to reach for her, to pull her into his arms and tell her that he felt the same way, that these past days had been both the best and worst of his life, because he had found someone extraordinary and was about to lose her. But Emma was injured and vulnerable and confused, and Thomas Norton was a good man who loved her and could give her a life of security and comfort. What did Jacob have to offer in comparison? A rough life on the frontier, a future that was uncertain at best, a heart that was already hers whether she wanted it or not. "You should go with Thomas," Jacob said, forcing the words out. "He is a good man and he can give you the life you deserve. What you are feeling right now, it is gratitude, not love, and gratitude is a poor foundation for a life together." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "What if you are wrong? What if this is more than gratitude?" "Then time will tell," Jacob said. "Marry your captain, build your life at Fort Whipple. If what you feel for me is real, it will still be there a month from now, a year from now. And if it fades, then you will know it was just the circumstance talking, not your heart." "And what will you do?" Emma asked. "I will do what I have always planned to do," Jacob said, though the future suddenly felt colorless and empty. "Buy land, build a ranch, make a life for myself." Emma reached out with her good hand and took his, squeezing gently. "If things were different," she said softly, "if I had met you before I met Thomas, if I had not given my word. But you did meet him first, and you did give your word," Jacob interrupted gently. "And you are the kind of person who honors her commitments. It is one of the things I admire most about you." They stood there in the fading light, hands clasped, both of them acutely aware that this was goodbye. Finally, Emma released his hand and stepped back. "Thank you, Jacob Foster," she said, "for everything." "Goodbye, Emma Norton," he said. "I hope you find happiness." She turned and walked back to where Mrs. Chen waited, and Jacob watched until they disappeared around the corner. Then he walked into the saloon and ordered whiskey, trying to drown the ache in his chest. The next morning, Jacob stood with half the town to watch as Thomas Norton helped Emma into the back of the wagon, settling her carefully on the mattress surrounded by pillows and blankets. She looked small and fragile, her arm still splinted, her face still showing the fading marks of her ordeal. She searched the crowd, and when her eyes found Jacob's, she raised her good hand in a small wave. He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, and then the wagon rolled forward, carrying her away from Vulture City and out of his life. Sheriff Dawson came to stand beside him. "That was a hard thing you did, letting her go." "She is not mine to let go," Jacob said. "She never was." "Maybe not," Dawson agreed, "but that does not make it hurt any less." Jacob spent the next month trying to lose himself in work. He took a job at the Triple Creek Ranch, working cattle from sunup to sundown until his body was too exhausted to think about Emma. At night, he lay in his bunk and stared at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every moment they had shared. He told himself it would get easier with time, that the ache would fade, that he would eventually meet someone else who made him feel even a fraction of what Emma had made him feel. He did not believe it, but he told himself anyway. 6 weeks after Emma left Vulture City, a letter arrived for him, care of the general store. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, elegant, and precise. Jacob opened it with trembling hands. "Dear Jacob, I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to write to you myself to let you know that I am recovering nicely. The doctors at Fort Whipple removed the splint from my arm last week, and while it is still weak, I can use it again. My ribs have healed and the scars on my back are fading. Physically, I am nearly whole again. Emotionally, I am less certain. Thomas has been kind and attentive, everything a woman could want in a husband. He has been patient about the wedding, understanding that I needed time to heal. We have spent hours talking, getting to know each other again after our long separation. He is a good man, Jacob, an honorable man, and I care for him deeply. But I do not love him the way I should love the man I am going to marry. I have tried to convince myself that love will grow with time, that affection and respect are enough to build a life on. I have tried to forget the way I felt when I woke up and saw you sitting by my bedside. I have tried to tell myself that you were right, that what I felt was just gratitude born of trauma. I have tried and I have failed. Last night, I told Thomas the truth. I told him that I could not marry him because my heart belongs to someone else. He was angry at first, and then hurt, and then, finally, understanding. He said that he had suspected as much, that he had seen the way I looked at you when you thought no one was watching. He released me from our engagement with grace and dignity, and I will always be grateful to him for that. I am writing to you from the stagecoach station in Prescott. Tomorrow morning, I board the coach back to Vulture City. I do not know if you still feel the way I think you felt, or if the past weeks have changed your heart. I do not know if I have any right to ask you to take a chance on me after everything that has happened, but I am asking anyway. I will arrive in Vulture City on the 15th of the month. If you are there when the coach arrives, I will know that you feel the same way I do. If you are not there, I will understand, and I will take the next coach to Phoenix, and then back to St. Louis, and you will never hear from me again. I am taking the biggest risk of my life, Jacob Foster. I hope you will be there to catch me. Yours, Emma. Jacob read the letter 3 times, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. The 15th. He checked the calendar on the wall of the general store. Today was the 14th. He ran back to the Triple Creek Ranch, told the foreman he was quitting, collected his pay and his few belongings. He rode into town and went directly to the bank, withdrawing nearly every cent he had saved over the past 3 years. Then he went to the land office and made an offer on 160 acres of grazing land just north of Vulture City, land he had been watching for months, waiting for the price to drop. The owner, eager to sell, accepted immediately, and by sunset, Jacob Foster was a landowner. He spent the night in his old room at the boarding house, too keyed up to sleep. Mrs. Chen brought him tea and smiled knowingly when she saw the letter on his nightstand. "She is coming back," she said. It was not a question. "Tomorrow," Jacob confirmed, "if I am reading this right." "You are reading it right," Mrs. Chen assured him. "That young woman has been in love with you since the day you carried her into town covered in blood and dust. Some of us could see it, even if the two of you were too stubborn to admit it." The next morning, Jacob was at the stagecoach station an hour before the coach was due to arrive. He paced the platform, checked his pocket watch every few minutes, straightened his hat, smoothed down his shirt. Sheriff Dawson walked by and grinned at him. "Heard Miss Norton is coming back," he said. "Also heard she is not engaged anymore." "News travels fast," Jacob said, "in a town this size. News is about the only thing that travels fast," Dawson said. "Good luck, son. You deserve a little happiness." The stagecoach arrived right on time, pulling up to the station in a cloud of dust. The driver climbed down, opened the door, and extended his hand to help the passengers out. An older gentleman emerged first, then a woman with 2 small children, and then, finally, Emma. She wore a simple traveling dress the color of sage, and her auburn hair was pinned up under a modest bonnet. Her arm was free of the splint, though she still favored it slightly. When she stepped onto the platform and saw Jacob waiting there, her entire face lit up with a smile that made his breath catch. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. She laughed, the sound pure and joyful, her arms going around his neck. "You are here," she said when he set her down, her eyes bright with tears. "I was so afraid you would not be here." "I have been here since dawn," Jacob said, framing her face with his hands. "I would have waited all day, all week if necessary. Emma, I have been half alive since you left. When I got your letter, when I realized you were coming back, it felt like the sun coming up after the longest night of my life." "I love you," Emma said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know it is too fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I love you, Jacob Foster, and I could not marry Thomas when every beat of my heart was calling your name." "I love you too," Jacob said, and then he kissed her, right there on the station platform in front of God and half the town. It was not his first kiss, but it felt like the first kiss that mattered, the first kiss that meant something beyond the moment. Emma kissed him back with equal fervor, her fingers tangling in his hair, and Jacob thought that if he died right now, he would die a happy man. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I bought land," he said. 160 acres. It is not much and there is no house yet, just open range and possibility. But I bought it yesterday because I wanted to have something to offer you, something real and permanent. "You already offered me everything I need," Emma said. "Your heart, that is all I want." "You have that," Jacob promised. "You have had it since the moment I lifted you out of the dust." They stood there on the platform, wrapped in each other's arms until Mrs. Chen appeared with a knowing smile. "The whole town is watching you too," she said. "Perhaps you should take this reunion somewhere more private." Jacob laughed and took Emma's hand, lacing their fingers together. "Come on," he said. "I want to show you our land." They borrowed a buggy from the livery and drove north out of town, following the road that led to the property Jacob had purchased. It was a beautiful piece of land, rolling hills covered in tough grasses and dotted with mesquite trees, with a seasonal creek running through the southern edge. The view stretched for miles in every direction, open sky and endless horizon. Emma stood in the middle of what would someday be their ranch, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "It is perfect," she said. "We can build a house right here, facing east to catch the sunrise. And there, that flat area, that would be perfect for a barn and corrals. Jacob, I can see it all so clearly, our whole future spread out before us." "Marry me," Jacob said, the words emerging before he had fully formed the thought. "I know I do not have a ring and I should probably court you properly, take you to dinners and dances and all the things a woman deserves, but I cannot wait, Emma. Marry me, be my wife, build this life with me." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you, Jacob Foster. I will marry you tomorrow if you can arrange it." "Give me 3 days," Jacob said. 3 days to get a license, to talk to Reverend Matthews, to make this official and legal and binding in the eyes of God and man. They were married on a Thursday afternoon in the small church at the edge of Vulture City. Emma wore a dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, simple white muslin with lace at the collar and cuffs. Jacob wore his best shirt and trousers, his hair slicked back, his hands shaking as he slipped the gold band onto Emma's finger. Doc Harrison served as his witness, and Mrs. Chen stood up with Emma. Sheriff Dawson attended, along with what seemed like half the town, all of them eager to celebrate the marriage of the cowboy who had saved the woman from certain death. Reverend Matthews spoke about love and commitment, about the trials that forge the strongest bonds, about how sometimes God brings people together in the most unexpected ways. Jacob barely heard the words. He was too focused on Emma, on the way she looked at him like he was the answer to every question she had ever asked, on the feel of her hand in his, on the knowledge that this extraordinary woman had chosen him. When the Reverend finally pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob kissed Emma with reverence and joy, and the small church erupted in applause. The reception was held at the boarding house, where Mrs. Chen had prepared a feast. There was music and dancing, and Jacob held Emma close as they swayed to the fiddle player's tune, her head resting on his shoulder, both of them lost in the wonder of this new beginning. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Jacob and Emma slipped away to the room he had rented for their wedding night. It was nothing fancy, just a clean room with a comfortable bed and lace curtains on the window, but it was theirs. Their first night as husband and wife. Jacob closed the door and turned to find Emma watching him with an expression of love and desire and trust that made his chest tight. "I am nervous," she admitted. "Is that foolish?" "Not foolish at all," Jacob said, crossing to her and taking her hands. "I am nervous too. But we have all the time in the world to learn each other, to build this marriage into something strong and lasting. Tonight is just the beginning." He kissed her then, slow and sweet, and Emma melted into him, her arms winding around his waist. They undressed each other with gentle hands and whispered endearments, discovering the landscape of each other's bodies with reverence and care. Jacob was mindful of Emma's still healing scars, tracing them with his fingertips and pressing kisses to each one, honoring the pain she had endured and the strength she had shown. When they finally came together, it was with tenderness and passion in equal measure. Emma gasped his name, her fingers digging into his shoulders, and Jacob buried his face in her hair, overwhelmed by the intimacy of it, by the knowledge that this woman was his wife, his partner, his home. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Emma's head on Jacob's chest, his fingers combing through her unbound hair. "I cannot believe this is real," she murmured. "2 months ago, I was on a stagecoach from St. Louis, heading to marry a man I barely knew. And now I am here married to you, about to build a life I never imagined possible." "Do you regret it?" Jacob asked quietly. "Giving up the security Thomas could have provided, the life at the fort?" Emma pushed herself up on one elbow, looking down at him seriously. "I do not regret a single choice that led me to this moment," she said firmly. "Yes, our life will be harder than it would have been as a captain's wife. We will have to work for everything we build. But it will be ours, Jacob, built on love and trust and true partnership. That is worth more than all the security in the world." Jacob pulled her down for a long, deep kiss. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me," he promised. "I know you will," Emma said, settling back against his chest with a contented sigh. They spent the next months building their life together. Jacob worked from sunrise to sunset, breaking ground for their house, hauling timber from the mountains, slowly transforming the empty land into a working ranch. Emma worked beside him when she could, though he often insisted she rest and let her body finish healing. She planted a garden near where the house would stand, vegetables and herbs and flowers that would eventually soften the harsh desert landscape. Mrs. Chen helped Emma furnish their small home with donated furniture and handmade quilts. Doc Harrison checked on Emma regularly, pleased with how well she had recovered from her injuries. Sheriff Dawson stopped by occasionally with news from town, and to report on the ongoing investigation into the stagecoach murders. It was during one of these visits, about 4 months after Jacob and Emma's wedding, that Dawson brought news that made Emma go pale. "We caught them," the sheriff said grimly. "The men who attacked your stagecoach. Territorial Marshal tracked them to a hideout near the Mexican border. 4 men just like you described. They are in custody now, waiting for trial." Emma's hand found Jacob's, gripping tight. "Will I have to testify?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Probably," Dawson said gently. "The prosecutor will want your account of what happened, but you will not be alone. Jacob can be there with you." The trial was held in Phoenix 6 weeks later. Emma and Jacob made the journey together, staying in a modest hotel near the courthouse. Emma was visibly nervous, her old injuries seeming to ache more in the stress of the approaching testimony. On the day she was called to testify, Jacob sat in the front row of the courtroom gallery, his presence a silent pillar of support. Emma took the stand and, in a clear, steady voice, recounted the attack. She described the men who had stopped the coach, the cold brutality with which they had murdered her fellow passengers, the terror of being dragged behind the fleeing horses. Several people in the gallery wept openly as she spoke. The defendants, 4 hard-faced men who showed no remorse, stared at her with cold eyes. When the prosecutor asked if she could identify her attackers, Emma pointed to each of the 4 men in turn. "Those are the men who destroyed so many lives that day," she said. "And I will carry the scars of what they did for the rest of my life." The defense attorney tried to shake her testimony, suggesting that her memory might be faulty due to her injuries, but Emma held firm. She remembered every terrible detail, and she would not let these men escape justice. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with a verdict of guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced each man to hang. As they left the courthouse, Emma sagged against Jacob, finally allowing herself to show the strain of the past days. "It is over," she whispered. "They cannot hurt anyone else now. You were so brave," Jacob said, holding her close. "I am proud of you." They returned to their ranch outside Vulture City, and Emma threw herself into making it a true home. The house Jacob had built was small but well constructed, with a bedroom, a main room that served as kitchen and parlor, and a loft that could be converted into additional sleeping space as their family grew. Emma filled it with curtains she had sewn, with furniture they had built or bought, with all the small touches that transformed a structure into a home. That first winter was hard, with cold nights and occasional snowfall that blanketed the desert in white. But they faced it together, huddled by the fireplace, making plans for the spring. Jacob talked about expanding the herd, about building proper barns and outbuildings. Emma talked about the garden she would plant, about the chickens she wanted to raise, about the life they were creating from scratch. In the spring, Emma discovered she was pregnant. The realization came gradually. She had been feeling tired and slightly ill in the mornings, but she attributed it to the hard work of ranch life. It was Mrs. Chen who finally put the pieces together during one of her visits. "How long has it been since your monthly courses?" she asked Emma bluntly. Emma counted back and felt her eyes widen. "Nearly 3 months," she said. "I thought the irregularity was from the trauma from my injuries." "Or you are carrying a child," Mrs. Chen said with a knowing smile. "We should have Doc Harrison confirm, but I have seen enough pregnant women to recognize the signs." Doc Harrison did confirm it, and when Emma told Jacob that evening, he picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "Emma, we are going to have a baby." "We are," she confirmed, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Jacob said, kneeling in front of her and pressing his ear to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your father. I cannot wait to meet you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Emma struggled with morning sickness in the early months. Jacob was attentive to the point of being overprotective, insisting she rest more, doing the heavier work himself, constantly asking if she needed anything. Emma bore his concern with good humor, understanding it came from a place of love. As her belly swelled with their growing child, they spent the evenings choosing names and making plans. If a boy, they agreed on Samuel Jacob Foster. If a girl, Rose Elizabeth Foster, after Emma's mother and Jacob's grandmother. The baby was born on a warm October evening with Mrs. Chen and Doc Harrison in attendance. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Jacob, pacing outside the bedroom, thought he might go mad from helplessness and fear. But finally, after nearly 12 hours, he heard a thin, reedy cry, and then Emma's exhausted but joyful voice calling his name. He rushed into the room to find Emma propped up against the pillows, sweaty and pale but radiantly happy, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Jacob approached on trembling legs and looked down at the tiny red face of his newborn son. Samuel had a cap of dark hair and his mother's delicate features, and Jacob fell in love with him instantly and completely. "He is perfect," Jacob whispered, reaching out to touch one impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers curled around his finger, and Jacob felt tears streaming down his face. "Emma, he is absolutely perfect. He looks like you," Emma said, smiling. "He has your chin and your stubbornness, I could already tell during the labor." Doc Harrison clapped Jacob on the shoulder. "Congratulations, son. You have a healthy boy and a strong wife. You are a lucky man." "I know," Jacob said, unable to take his eyes off his son. "I know exactly how lucky I am." Fatherhood transformed Jacob in ways he had not expected. He had always been responsible and hardworking, but now he had someone to build for, someone who depended on him completely. He worked even harder to make the ranch profitable, to ensure his family would always have food and shelter and security. Emma proved to be a natural mother, nursing Samuel with patience and caring for him with a fierce protectiveness that reminded Jacob of the strength she had shown after the attack. Sometimes, when he watched her singing to their son or rocking him to sleep, he marveled at how far they had both come from that terrible day when he had found her broken in the dust. Samuel grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, happy baby who smiled readily and rarely cried. When he was 6 months old, he started sitting up on his own. At 9 months, he was crawling everywhere, getting into everything, keeping both his parents constantly busy. Jacob built a wooden playpen to keep him safe while they worked, but Samuel protested any confinement with loud wails. "He has your independent spirit," Jacob told Emma one evening as they watched Samuel determinedly pulling himself up on the furniture, trying to stand. "And your determination not to be told what he can and cannot do," Emma countered with a laugh. When Samuel was just over a year old, Emma discovered she was pregnant again. This second pregnancy was easier, her body more accustomed to the changes, and she suffered less from morning sickness. Jacob worried about her managing a toddler while carrying another child, but Emma was resilient and capable, as always. Their daughter, Rose, was born on a spring morning when the desert was ablaze with wildflowers. The labor was faster this time, only 6 hours, and Rose emerged with a lusty cry that announced her presence to the world. She had Emma's auburn hair and green eyes, and Jacob was utterly smitten from the first moment. "Now we have one of each," Emma said contentedly as she nursed Rose while Samuel, now walking and chattering in his own toddler language, examined his new sister with curious interest. "Our family is complete," Jacob agreed, though even as he said it, he knew that if Emma wanted more children, he would gladly give her a dozen. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered, Jacob's hard work and good management paying off as the herd grew, and he began to earn a solid reputation for quality cattle. He hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young men from town who were learning the trade. Emma managed the household, and the children with grace and efficiency, and somehow still found time to maintain her garden and preserve food for the winter months. Samuel grew into an energetic, adventurous boy who followed his father everywhere, asking constant questions about the ranch, the animals, how things worked. Rose was quieter, more thoughtful, content to sit with her mother and listen to stories or help with simple tasks around the house. When Samuel was 5 and Rose was 3, Emma surprised Jacob by announcing another pregnancy. This one was unexpected, and Emma admitted to being a bit overwhelmed by the prospect of caring for 3 young children. "We will manage," Jacob assured her, pulling her into his arms. We always do. Their second son, Daniel, was born on a cold December night, arriving fast and with little warning. Doc Harrison barely made it to the house in time, and Mrs. Chen had to serve as midwife. Daniel was a small baby, quieter than his siblings had been, with Jacob's dark hair and serious gray eyes. "He looks like a thinker," Emma said, cradling him close. "I think this one will be our scholar." Time passed in the way it does for busy, happy families. The children grew, the ranch expanded, and Jacob and Emma's love for each other deepened with each passing year. They had their struggles, of course. There were years when drought threatened the herd, when money was tight, when illness swept through the family. But they faced each challenge together, their partnership strengthened by the trust and love they had built. Samuel grew into a tall, capable young man who took naturally to ranch work. By the time he was 16, he was managing significant portions of the ranch operations, and Jacob began to plan for the day when he would turn the whole enterprise over to his son. Rose developed a love of learning and spent hours reading every book she could get her hands on. She talked about becoming a teacher like her mother had been, and Emma encouraged her ambitions. Daniel, true to Emma's early prediction, was the intellectual of the family, fascinated by science and mechanics, always taking things apart to see how they worked. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jacob took Emma on a trip back to Phoenix, their first real time away from the children and the ranch since they had married. They stayed in the finest hotel Jacob could afford, ate at restaurants, attended a theatrical performance. It was a luxury after years of hard work and careful budgeting. On their last evening, as they walked through the city streets hand in hand, Emma stopped and turned to face Jacob. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "The life we have built." "It has been hard work, so much harder than the life I could have had as an officer's wife." Jacob cupped her face in his hands, looking into the green eyes he had loved from the moment he had first seen them gazing up at him from the dust. "I have never regretted a single moment," he said firmly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Emma Foster. You and our children and this life we have built together. I would not trade it for anything in the world." "Good," Emma said, her eyes bright with tears. "Because neither would I. Choosing you was the best decision I ever made." They returned to the ranch and their children, to the life they had carved out of the harsh Arizona territory through love and determination and sheer stubbornness. The years continued to pass, marked by birthdays and holidays, by births and deaths in the community, by the steady accumulation of memories that make up a life well lived. Samuel married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property when he was 22, and within a year, Jacob and Emma were grandparents. Rose did indeed become a teacher, taking a position at the school in Vulture City, though she continued to live at home. Daniel, at 18, received a scholarship to study engineering in San Francisco, the first member of the family to pursue higher education. As Jacob approached 50, with silver threading through his dark hair and permanent lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, he sometimes stood on the porch of the house he had built with his own hands and marveled at how his life had unfolded. The scared, lonely cowboy he had been, searching for purpose and meaning, seemed like a different person entirely from the man he had become. Emma, now in her late 40s, still beautiful despite the gray in her hair and the fine lines on her face, would often join him on the porch in the evenings. They would sit in the rocking chairs Jacob had made, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, and talk about their day, their children, their grandchildren, their dreams for the future. "You ever think about that day?" Emma asked one evening. "The day you found me?" "Sometimes," Jacob admitted, "though it feels like a lifetime ago now." "It was a lifetime ago," Emma said softly. "We were different people then. I was so scared, so broken, and you were so alone, so searching for something you could not quite name." "I was searching for you," Jacob said simply. "I just did not know it until I found you lying in the dust and felt like my whole life had been leading me to that exact moment." Emma reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together the way they had done countless times over the years. "I almost died that day," she said. "But instead I found life, real life, with you." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere inside the house, they could hear Rose preparing dinner, humming a tune their mother had taught them. Samuel's children were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Daniel had written to say he would be home for Christmas, bringing news of his work on the railroad expansion. Jacob tightened his grip on Emma's hand and thought about all the years behind them and all the years still ahead. They had built something extraordinary together, he and his brave, resilient wife. Not just a ranch or a family, but a legacy of love and strength that would outlive them both. "I love you, Emma Foster," he said, the words as true and necessary as the first time he had spoken them. "I love you too, Jacob Foster," Emma replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Always and forever." As darkness settled over their land, Jacob felt a profound sense of peace. His life had meaning and purpose. He was loved and cherished. He had taken a woman who had been dragged and broken in the dust, had lifted her gently and ridden for the doctor, and in doing so had saved not just her life, but his own. The years continued their steady march forward. More grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch house with noise and laughter during holidays and celebrations. Samuel took over full management of the ranch as Jacob gradually stepped back, content to serve as advisor and to spend more time with Emma. Rose married the new minister in town, a kind young man who shared her love of books and learning. Daniel returned from San Francisco with a wife and plans to build a manufacturing facility in Phoenix, though he made regular trips home to visit his parents. When Jacob turned 60, the family threw a grand celebration, gathering relatives and friends from across the territory. Doc Harrison, now quite elderly himself but still sharp of mind, made a toast to the man who had saved Emma's life all those years ago and in doing so, had created a family that enriched the entire community. Mrs. Chen, gray-haired but still energetic, brought special dishes she had prepared. Sheriff Dawson, long retired but still a familiar presence in Vulture City, regaled the younger generation with stories of the old days. Emma, watching the festivities from Jacob's side, squeezed his hand. "Look what we built," she murmured. "All of this from such a terrible beginning." "The best things often grow from the worst circumstances," Jacob replied. "We took something broken and made it whole. We took pain and transformed it into joy." As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Jacob and Emma found themselves alone on the porch once again, their favorite place to reflect on the day. The desert stretched out before them, bathed in moonlight, exactly as it had been that night so long ago when Jacob had carried a broken woman to safety. "Thank you," Emma said suddenly. "For what?" Jacob asked, though he thought he knew. "For seeing me when I was at my most broken and choosing to help anyway," Emma said. "For not riding past, for not leaving me to die, for giving me a reason to live and a life worth living." "You gave me the same," Jacob said. "Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You taught me what it means to truly live, to love, to build something that matters." They sat together until the moon had risen high above the desert. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and had built a love story that would be remembered long after they were gone. The final years of Jacob's life were peaceful. He watched his grandchildren grow, helped teach them the skills he had learned over a lifetime of ranching. He spent long afternoons with Emma, talking about everything and nothing, grateful for every moment they had together. His body grew weaker with age, his joints stiff, his movements slower, but his mind remained sharp, and his love for Emma never wavered. When Jacob passed away quietly in his sleep at the age of 73, with Emma at his side and his family gathered around, his last words were of gratitude. Gratitude for the life he had been given, for the woman who had shared it with him, for the family they had created together. Emma lived another 5 years after Jacob's death, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. She spent her final years sharing stories of Jacob, of their early days building the ranch, of the love they had shared. She wanted to make sure that future generations understood that their family had been built on a foundation of courage, resilience, and a love that had overcome impossible odds. When Emma finally passed, peaceful and ready to join her beloved husband, she was laid to rest beside him in the small cemetery outside Vulture City. Their shared headstone bore a simple inscription: Jacob Foster, 1849–1922, Emma Norton Foster, 1852–1927, united by tragedy, bound by love, remembered with gratitude, but the true monument to their love was not the stone marker. It was the thriving ranch that bore their name, passed down through generations. It was the dozens of descendants who carried their legacy forward. It was the story that was told and retold, of the cowboy who had found a woman dragged and broken in the dust, who had lifted her gently and ridden for the doctor, and who had, in that single act of compassion, changed both their lives forever. The ranch still stood decades later, though it had been modernized and expanded. But in the main house, carefully preserved, was the original structure that Jacob had built with his own hands. And on certain evenings, when the sun set over the Arizona desert in shades of gold and crimson, some said they could see 2 figures sitting in rocking chairs on the porch, holding hands and watching the beauty of the land they had loved, together, even in death as they had been in life. Their love story became legend in Vulture City and the surrounding territory. It was told to young couples as an example of how true love could emerge from tragedy, how choosing each other every day was more important than grand gestures. It was told to those facing hardship as a reminder that the darkest moments can lead to the greatest blessings. And always, the story began the same way. There was a cowboy named Jacob Foster who found a woman named Emma Norton dragged and broken in the dust. He lifted her gently and rode for the doctor, not knowing that in saving her life, he would find his own true purpose. And from that terrible day grew a love that would span decades and create a legacy that lives on still. The truth was, both Jacob and Emma had been broken in their own ways before they found each other. He had been searching for meaning, for connection, for a reason to build instead of just exist. She had been chasing security instead of passion, settling for comfort instead of love. The attack that nearly killed her had, paradoxically, freed them both to become who they were meant to be in the end. Their story was not really about the dramatic rescue, though that was how it began. It was about 2 people who chose each other every single day for over 50 years. It was about building a life together through hard work and dedication. It was about creating a family and a legacy that honored the second chance they had both been given. It was about a love that had started in the dust and blood of tragedy, and had grown into something beautiful and enduring and true. A love that had transformed them both, that had created ripples extending far beyond their own lives, that had proved that even the darkest moments can become the foundation for the brightest future. And in Vulture City, Arizona, where the desert still bloomed with wildflowers every spring, and the sun still painted the landscape in gold. Their story lived on, inspiring new generations to believe in the transformative power of love, courage, and choosing each other against all odds. The ranch house still stood, a testament to what two people could build when they believed in each other and worked toward a common dream. The land still produced, managed now by Jacob and Emma's great-great-grandchildren, who felt the weight and honor of their legacy every time they rode across the property. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the mesquite trees, and the stars emerged one by one in the vast Arizona sky, visitors to the old ranch house swore they could feel something in the air. A sense of peace, of love, of two souls who had found each other against impossible odds and had built something that would last forever. Jacob and Emma's story reminded everyone who heard it that life can change in an instant, that a single choice can alter the course of everything, that the person you save might just save you right back. It reminded them that love is not always easy or convenient, but it is always worth fighting for. It reminded them that from tragedy can come triumph, from brokenness can come wholeness, and from the dust of despair can rise the most beautiful love of all. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren carried forward the values Jacob and Emma had instilled through their example. Hard work, integrity, compassion, and the courage to choose love even when it is difficult. The Foster family became known throughout Arizona as people of honor, their word as good as gold, their commitment to community unwavering. But ask any member of the family what they were most proud of, and they would all give the same answer. They were proud to be descended from Jacob and Emma, from a love story that had started in tragedy and ended in triumph, from two people who had shown that the human spirit is resilient beyond measure and that true love can overcome anything. And so the story ended where it began, in the dust and heat of the Arizona desert, where a cowboy named Jacob Foster once found a woman named Emma Norton broken and dying, lifted her gently, and rode for the doctor. But between that beginning and this end lay a lifetime of love, of joy, of challenges overcome and dreams realized. Between that beginning and this end lay a story worth telling, a love worth celebrating, and a legacy that would never be forgotten. In the end, Jacob and Emma had both found exactly what they were searching for, though neither had known what that was until they found each other. They had built a life of meaning and purpose, had raised children and grandchildren who carried their values forward, had loved each other with a depth and devotion that most people only dream of. They had taken a terrible tragedy and transformed it into a beautiful beginning. They had proven that sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to the best years of your life. They had shown that love, real love, the kind that lasts a lifetime, is built not in dramatic moments but in the quiet, everyday choices to stand beside each other through whatever comes. And that, perhaps, was the real lesson of their story. Not that a cowboy once saved a woman's life, though he did. Not that two people fell in love despite impossible odds, though they did. But that love, true love, is a choice made every single day. A choice to lift each other up when you fall. A choice to ride toward help instead of away from trouble. A choice to build together instead of alone. Jacob and Emma Foster made that choice every day for over 50 years, and in doing so, they created something that would outlive them both. A love story for the ages, a family built on solid foundations, and a legacy that reminded everyone who heard their tale that from the most broken beginnings can come the most beautiful endings. Their story, the story of the cowboy who found her dragged and broken in the dust and chose to save her, had become the story of two people who saved each other and, in doing so, created something eternal. It had become a story of hope, of resilience, of the transformative power of choosing love. And in Vulture City, Arizona, where the desert bloomed and the sun set in glorious color, and their descendants still worked the land they had claimed, that story lived on, a testament to the enduring truth that love, real love, the kind worth having, is always worth fighting for. Always and forever.